Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Training, Attracting and Retaining, Delivering a World-Class Team of Technicians. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as people sign in, but if you could just use the question box below to let me know that you can hear everything okay, and then we'll get started shortly. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. We have just over 1,000 registered listeners. At times like these, it is crucial that as an industry, we continue to come together, share insights and strategize solutions. To that regards, you do have the ability to ask questions to the panelists throughout the session, so please do. We want this to make an interactive panel and webinar. I'm Emily, Project Director at Reuters Events, and this webinar is one of the many pieces of work we're running in conjunction with the PV Operations and Financial Strategies USA 2020 Virtual Conference, November 12th and 13th. The conference this year will incorporate all of the key areas that the industry has asked us to focus on, including solar plus storage, portfolio acquisition, end-of-life management, and O&M strategies, plus more, provided by industry experts from Duke Energy, Southern Power, EDF Renewables, BlackRock, and many, many more. We at Reuters Events have created our own bespoke platform to host our virtual conference, which closely resembles our usual conference plus more. It ensures that the conference continues despite the difficulties this year. The conference will incorporate a live stream of 30 plus strategic sessions, plus an on-demand hub, which would include another 30 plus preloaded presentations, panels, and workshops, each featuring high-leveled industry leaders. Today's webinar will discuss workforce training, talent retention, the recruitment process, and the effects of COVID-19 on the solar PV workforce. I'd like to thank and welcome today's speakers. Josh Rogers, Director of Solar Operations at Duke Energy, Brad Purtell, Director of Services, Business Development with Invenergy Services, and Julien Glover, Control Center Manager at Cypress Creek Renewables. Remember to send in those questions using the box below, and we'll get as many answered as possible. The speakers are each going to give a short bio now, and then we'll move on to the first questions. So, Josh, you first.
Thanks, Emily. As Emily mentioned, I'm the Director of Solar Operations for Duke Energy. We currently operate over 1 gigawatt of solar across the US and several different states. My background, essentially, prior to the solar industry, I was in the US Navy for 9 years as a nuclear operator and instructor. From there, joined the industry on the training side, developing training for one of the leading inverter OEMs. And I've worked for several different O&M providers throughout the industry. And so look forward to the discussion today on training.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm Brad Purtell. I'm the director on Invenergy services side. I lead Invenergy's business development for third-party services. I have been in the renewable space for just shy of 10 years with various roles in operations, engineering, compliance, and now business development. Before Invenergy, very much like Josh, I was in the nuclear Navy as an electrician on submarines. Also looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julien Glover. I'm the Control Center Manager for Cypress Creek Renewables O&M. I'm also a NERC Certified System Operator. I've been in the solar industry since 2011, starting out in residential and C&I installations, and then started working in utility scale PV with Cypress Creek Renewables. We currently have over 3 gigawatts of solar PV in our operating portfolio. And our mission as a company is to power a sustainable future one project at a time.
Great. Thank you, all of you. So the first question is, with the amount of solar energy going into the ground over the next 3 years, there will need to be a much larger workforce of technicians and therefore training. Do you think that the industry needs to have a way to train this surge of workforce initiation?
Well, Emily, I'll go ahead and start with that. I think the short answer is yes. If you look historically, the U.S. has doubled the solar workforce since those that have been in the solar field since 2012 had to grow with it, figuring out their way on how to be operationally competent with such a new industry. We're set to put in, I think, up to 18 gigawatts in 2020. And then over the next 4 years, 18 to 20 gigawatts per year. The closest we've ever come to that is 15 gigawatts back in 2016, which was then also 10% more than any other year. So with that much solar, the workforce will again have to double, but instead of it going from 100 or gaining 125,000 people over 8 years, it'll now be 250,000 people over 4. This won't only be a challenge for independent service providers like Invenergy Services, but also for some of the manufacturers and EPCs that do service those projects under long-term service agreements. The other thing is the industry hasn't really consolidated as much as some others like gas or wind. So the amount of different equipment out there just presents a challenge for training, since there is less of a standardized way of performing O&M. All are mostly similar, but they all have their own nuances.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to what Brad said. I mean, I completely agree with that. The other things to consider is obviously the O&M cost pressures on the long-term investment for these sites. So being efficient, really deploying technicians that are, not just, there, but obviously can quickly respond to downtime, troubleshoot complex repairs. And as Brad mentioned, I mean, across the industry, the technology constantly changes. Every site that gets built seems to have a different nuance to it, whether that be in the form of layout or in the form of the equipment. And so just having technicians that, can adapt both in the field, but also in their approach, right? They have to have a mindset of continuous learning. And without that, as part of your culture and as part of your training environment, that training and now I'm certified and I'm done is not really going to work as the industry continues to evolve.
Yeah, and also, to kind of touch on all of that, that's the same goes, for control center operators. There's so many different manufacturers that we have to deal with, and really from an efficiency standpoint, we need to make sure that the operators have the training and the resources that they need to be able to diagnose things effectively, so that when technicians are going out in the field, they understand what they're working on. But also to try and resolve things remotely as much as we can to help save on truck rolls.
Great, thank you all. The next question is for Brad. How does your company plan to train a significant number of employees in a relatively short period of time?
It's a good question. I think that structure and standardization is really how that gets accomplished. I mean, in terms of structure, having a growth plan for the employees that helps shape their future. If they can see what needs to be accomplished in front of them, then they can understand what is needed to achieve their successful growth. We have a very structured progression path that helps with, one, learning the equipment, 2, learning how the rest of the company interplays with their job, and 3, develops their careers. And then in terms of standardization, on the other hand, that can help with large influx of employees coming in. I know I mentioned how many different makes and models of equipment are out there. It's important for employees to understand their own equipment. But we need to try and standardize as many aspects of that education as we can. So things like electrical fundamentals, substation, switchyard components, and functionality, equipment performance expectations, all those things can apply to most projects, and therefore are usually the basis for starting a training program.
Great, thank you. And then the following question is for Josh. So what sort of training do you provide new employees? Is there a continuing education that Duke Energy focuses on?
Yeah, as far as training goes, when we first hire employees, what we do is what's called the Duke Renewables Academy. Essentially put them through kind of the crash course on, what is it like to be a technician with Duke, our policies, procedures, and that's really more of the corporate foundation as far as, completing the work at hand. As far as, technical specifics, just like Brad mentioned, within Duke, we've also got a technician progression program that specifically lays out two pathways, a solar technician pathway and a wind technician pathway. And so there's a Solar Tech 1 and a Solar Tech 2 qualification, Wind Tech 1 and Wind Tech 2 qualification. With that, Brad mentioned the standardization. With substations being the same across many platforms, we also have what's called Electrical Operator 1 and Electrical Operator 2, where we put them through those electrical fundamentals, substation operations, recloser operations, and some of those more fleet-wide aspects. So, essentially that's kind of the baseline or standard what we do. As far as continuing learning, we're currently partnering with Solar Energy International to continuously develop our field training aspects with hands-on learning. And then the last piece of it is our corrective action program. So, as incidents, happen and as we have lessons learned, what we really try to do is incorporate that back into our field teams and make sure that we're training on those aspects, not making the same mistakes year over year, and continuing to improve the efficiency as well as the performance of the team.
Amazing. So Julien, all industries have had to adapt during COVID-19 to reduce risk. What has Cypress Creek Renewables done to maintain the consistent operation of its control center?
Yeah, it's definitely been a unique situation, which already, we already have a unique type of operation going on within a renewable energy control center. Right around when things were starting to get bad in the U.S., we, myself and leadership, got together and developed basically a separate operating protocol for us to be using, it basically until further notice. There's basically it's a two-pronged approach that focuses on safety, which, as an O&M provider, one of our number one priority is safety, and also making sure that we have business continuity. So that involved involved making sure that we have time built in between shifts to be able to clean workstations. We've reduced the number of staff physically in our control center. That's one advantage that we can take with at least with our distributed generation operations. To have that separated out from the control center, so we have less people. They're able to physically distance. and you know, making sure that, you know, we have streamlined communications. I know, at least, you know, for me, it can be more difficult to really be at least as visibly involved working remote. I would very much like to be be there with the operators. So it's important for me to make sure, you know, that I'm as available as I can be, to make sure that they don't feel like they're kind of, you know, being left out or on their own. So it's really important, you know, to keep the employee morale up.
Yeah, definitely. It's a hard time that and a strange time that we're all adapting to. So one of the industry's biggest challenges is not only training, but retaining the workforce. Josh, what are the biggest challenges that you are facing in both attracting and retaining talent?
Yeah, I mean, with the growth comes the challenge of everybody's competing for, you know, that very small skill set. So one thing that we've done as far as attracting talent is really kind of open up our perspective. I would say a good majority of our fleet technicians and, you know, even within some of our leadership team, you know, our backgrounds don't necessarily all come from years and years of solar. So what we're really looking for is, you know, technicians that have that adaptability that I said, and that hunger to learn and continue to build their knowledge base. And so, you know, we've seen, you know, military personnel, veterans be very adaptable, HVAC techs, commercial electricians a lot of times. And so, you know, really, you know, just kind of expanding our horizons as far as what skill sets are out there. We've also brought a number of wind technicians from our wind fleet over into the solar fleet once, you know, that wear and tear on the body, you know, kind of get a little bit older sometimes, you know, solar is more attractive for them. As far as retaining talent, you know, one of the biggest things for us is stability of the workforce and the culture. One thing that Duke does really well is really focus on what Brad mentioned, was the long-term career prospect, right? So we're not hiring somebody just to be a solar technician forever or for our need. What we want to really do is bring them in-house, develop them, and hopefully give them a career progression throughout a much larger company. With Duke being a regulated utility, you know, we've got natural gas, nuclear, we've got training teams, finance groups, customer delivery groups. So there's a wide range of opportunities for individuals. And so we really focus on that, you know, that continuous improvement and that development for their careers. As far as, you know, retaining them, you know, a lot of it has to do with, you know, the industry is constantly changing. And the struggle is how do you build stability into something that's always changing? And so what we've really done is kind of stabilized our vision as a company and as a renewables organization to really help kind of give the team the understanding of where the company's headed, both short term and long term.
Great. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that answer. Otherwise, we'll move to.
Yeah, so you know, that I think that you know, Josh, you touched on some really good points there. You know, that's pretty similar, you know, to our approach in our control center. You know, when we are bringing people in, you know, we're looking for, it's really a diverse group of candidates, but a lot of it is really, you know, to help people get into the industry. You know, we have a really robust training and qualification program on our end that, you know, gives operators a clear path, a clear development path, so that things aren't really ambiguous. Which again, I like how you said that. You know, it's with everything being, you know, constantly changing. You want to make sure that you have, you know, some kind of stability and standardization, and that is also really important for retention. You know, just as you said with, you know, with technicians, you know, we want to have people come in as operators and you know, develop them, and then, you know, if after a couple of years, you know, if they're looking to move into a different, you know, sector within the company or the industry, then you know, we're kind of teeing them up for that.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that I would really add there, I mean, I like the idea that Josh had brought up. We also do that at Invenergy with creating what quote unquote energy techs, where we leverage our wind technicians that have been in the field for 10 to 12 years, that they have the wear and tear on the body, and would rather continue performing O&M on renewable generation, but just not climbing towers 1 or 2 times a day. So doing that, as well as trying to, I mean, with the growth of the pipeline as it is over the next 3 to 4 years, I mean, there's more and more opportunities for these technicians to be closer to their home, their root home. So being able to provide that stability and even being closer to home is something that we'll look at. We try to source about 70% at least of our technicians at our projects from the local communities.
Great. So another question for the whole panel: which method of training have you seen to be most effective?
I guess I could go ahead and start. Obviously, everyone has their own method of preferred learning. Some learn better in a classroom, some on the job, some are better with reading, others with visualization. What we've found is the majority of our technicians respond best to in-person classroom training paired with on-the-job training, especially with their own equipment. So when we're creating when we created our own training group back in 2017 for wind, we also wanted that in-person training as much as possible. For example, our substation trainer, he makes sure every new project that goes in the ground, every new facility we build, he goes to the site, he develops the site-specific switching procedures, and then trains each of the technicians that will be working at that facility on their own equipment. So they are very familiar with their own equipment. Now, obviously, training to that level on every topic isn't very sustainable to do it everywhere for every training. So virtualized training helps for certain materials, but we also have procedures and policies and training material available to those that learn better from reading on their own.
Yeah, I was, I guess I can kind of echo that. When we were first onboarding a new operator, we have a pretty rigorous training program, and a lot of it, while there is a lot of computer-based learning that has to be done, really we see the most success, with in-person and on-the-job training, and what we do try to do with our more like classroom style training is, while we have sessions that we'll offer, we're working to have those recorded so that then those can be uploaded to our computer-based learning platform for reference later on. But still continuing to have those in-person trainings is very important.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree. I mean, obviously, in-person training has a certain amount of value and retention within most technicians and field operators. I think, with the combination of field training, computer-based training, what we're also exploring with at Duke is some, virtual reality or augmented training where, you're essentially simulating those similar type events, especially some of the substation operations or inspections that can be a little bit riskier. It also helps for, that standardization, right? If you have a trainer that goes out 1 week, he might train and be very thorough. Another week, maybe he's just kind of breezing through things. And so that standardization sometimes is a little bit more important when you've got that structured qualification process, as well as, some sort of interactive virtual session that can be utilized. And, we're really seeing that, especially with, COVID-19 and some of the travel restrictions, as a possible pathway forward for that in-person training. And so it's just one of those things where, really a good solid mix, but the in-person training is always going to really resonate with the technicians. One step that we've taken is to remind the technicians and our teams, as we do that training in the field, if we don't have a procedure behind it, and if it's all tribal knowledge and passed down from tech to tech, it's not sustainable, long term. And so what we've got to do is continue to build that knowledge base with our procedures, our processes, and our protocols, and make it more, once again, standardized across the fleet. And that's really how, kind of the original question is how does the industry do it? It really stems from documenting more, getting technicians trained, and making sure that at some point we get to a procedural compliance side of things with the industry, rather than every technician kind of, winging it out there and figuring it out based on their knowledge base.
Real quick, I'm actually curious, Brad or Josh, if you have any comments on this.
I think that,
oh, sorry, you can go ahead, Brad.
No, the only thing I was going to say is kind of complimenting Josh's standardization is really looking at the trainers themselves and making sure that you have specialized trainers so that they're delivering that consistent message to each of those technicians. So that was all I was going to say. Go ahead, Julien.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, even early on in developing our qualification process, that was a really big component there. What I was curious, like Brad or Josh, feel free to comment on this, but one thing that I'd like to do is to have try to encourage as much cross training between departments as possible. So our control center operators, which this has been a little bit held up with COVID-19, but we typically are sending them out with field techs on a relatively regular basis. And also, at a certain higher level, operators, we get them certified for switching in substations as well, just to give them exposure and to really, it's important to me for operators to understand, especially if they haven't done field work, for them to really understand the challenges that technicians are dealing with in the field. Coming from my background, like I really, I've done field work, and I really want to make sure that that's well understood, because we do deal, directly with the field technicians, and I want to make sure that everybody understands what everybody else is dealing with.
Yeah, no, Julien, we've done that from Invenergy. We've done this. I don't want to call it a swap program. I feel like we call it a changeover program, or an exchange program is what we were calling it, where technicians would come into the control center so that they got a better understanding and appreciation for the operators and the power schedulers in the control center, but then vice versa, sending the operators and schedulers out to the projects, especially those ones that they were interacting with the most. Typically, we would send them on usually a 3-day event. One would be doing a preventative maintenance. This is both on wind and solar. They would do a preventative maintenance one day. They'd go with a crew and do a troubleshooting or corrective maintenance the next day, and then usually a half day in the substation to understand all of the components and switching procedures, so that they have an understanding of what the technicians are doing while they're communicating with the transmission operator.
Great. So moving to the hiring and recruiting side of this webinar, when hiring for the control center, what do Cypress Creek Renewables look for in a candidate?
So we actually we're looking for pretty, like I said earlier, a very diverse group of people with different backgrounds and experiences. With everything being, so new from a control center operation standpoint, if we had just like the exact same type of hire, then we could have some serious blind spots and really not be prepared for the challenges that are coming that we don't even know yet, which seem to come up a lot. So we're always having to make sure that we're staying nimble, from a personnel standpoint. we've hired people. Well, we actually, I appreciate that you both, Josh and Brad, are Navy nukes. We've got 2 Navy nukes in our control center right now. And we've also hired some people with maybe less expected backgrounds. We have one operator that we hired who completed the environmental technology management program at NC State. They had been since then they had been working as a chef, and that was it was interesting because as soon as I recall the interview, once we started talking about their experience and really what they did and what they were good at, I realized like that's extremely similar to what we're doing. It's just that we're working with computers and electricity, so that's I was certainly surprised by that, and it really just helped reinforce the fact that when we are recruiting and hiring, that we're not limiting ourselves to say just somebody who is NERC certified, has been in the traditional power industry, though that is certainly a bonus, and we do hire people like that, but also to make sure that we're just staying open to people who could maybe are lower in the development process, which we can help them through, but can definitely contribute to our operations.
Great. And kind of along the same field, what sort of people apply for solar technician positions at Invenergy? So how do you recruit and then retain people who are not only interested in a position, but also want to be part of the wider company?
So to answer what sorts of people apply, I mean, solar techs come from a variety of career experiences and backgrounds. We're typically looking for a strong technical aptitude, like Josh was mentioning, specifically of mechanical or electrical systems. Many of our current techs have prior experience with automobile repair, farm equipment repair, some trade work. We also find that military experience, very much like the control center, it lends itself to success as a technician. We also we always take a candidate's genuine interest in the industry and the company into consideration as well. So we don't try to limit our base for technicians. Now, as far as how we recruit, we'll take different approaches depending on the site and the location. We'll try to meet people where they are as much as possible. This can be through like ads in local newspapers or bulletin boards in local establishments, bars, restaurants, VFWs, American Legions. We also try to educate the development team that's on the project as well on the job and the application interview process to share with the local communities before the site is actually operational. We feel that word of mouth referrals is another way to attract applicants. In all cases, we want candidates to know that Invenergy is a long or has a sustained growth over the last 15 plus years. What we value safety, training, teamwork, and where they have an opportunity to grow their career through advancement. Now, prior to COVID-19, jobs in the clean energy industry were among the fastest growing professions in the US. But I mean, despite the impact that it's had on renewables, the industry is still in need of solar and wind technicians for operating or even near operational sites. So we've found that people actively seek out jobs in clean energy, like a solar technician, because it's an opportunity to build a long-lasting career that, like I said before, is close to home. So all of those ultimately lead to retention.
Great. So within kind of moving forward with that, are there creative and new methods that are being used when hiring new employees? Julien, at Cypress Creek Renewables, how is this run?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I wouldn't really say that Cypress Creek is doing anything probably different than other companies are from a recruiting and hiring standpoint. I think that I apologize if I have any dogs barking in the background. So I think that one thing that we probably do that's a little bit unique is our outreach programs to community college, technical colleges. We work directly with Appalachian State University, to try and help with educating people from a technical standpoint, and also just to help build relationships. As Brad said, the word of mouth aspect, I think is the best way to be bringing people in.
Great. So kind of adding to that, what roles are most in demand at the moment from all of your companies?
I mean, I guess I'll start there. Obviously we've been just like several companies bringing on some of our largest sites that we've brought on in a very long time. We've grown our fleet 2 times in the last year and a half, and so for us right now it's really on 2 fronts: performance engineers who are really analyzing data and driving some of our operations and maintenance through the analytics. And then on the other side is obviously the field personnel, right? I mean, that's where, the sites are maintained. That's how the money is made. And so, the focus can't be lost on the field. So, I would say with the growth, as we started the webinar, it's really focused on the technicians. And as we bring on new sites, what is that core number of technicians that's going to be able to maintain that new site or that region? Can that site be absorbed into existing, teams, based on, efficiency gains or procedures? And so, really, our biggest needs are on the performance front, performance engineers analyzing data and driving our maintenance. And then on the ground, making sure that these assets are taken care of, not just for Duke, but, financial investors, customers, as well as the industry as a whole, right? We're all in the renewable industry, not necessarily just to push the business forward, but, change the energy landscape across the world. So, unless we're doing a great job of that on the field and taking care of the equipment, these 20, 30, 35-year investments just simply aren't going to get to the end of life.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Josh. I think that the boots on the ground is definitely a primary focus for us. I mean, we have I want to say 3 gigawatts over the next 3 years going in the ground. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of manpower, but not putting all of the emphasis on the field technicians. We do have back office support that does support those field technicians. I mean, having that robust feedback loop between the control center, the technicians, the engineers, all of that working together in harmony, you need much as the boots on the ground. So performance engineers, asset managers, availability engineers, things like that really drive how the field technicians are able to execute on the ground. But the engineers, without that information from the field, are unable to really, I mean, they complement each other.
So the next question that's just come in is, what would you say the split between the amount of work that's required for installation is with the amount of work that's required for maintenance within solar PV installations? So which aspects do you think present the biggest challenges in terms of training?
Yes, I guess I can take this one. Obviously with the installation, construction crews quickly ramp up with local workforces or contract labor that comes in and quickly installs things. Nothing against construction companies, but there's, a wide range of, aspects from the design and installation of these sites all the way through commissioning. What we've really tried to do is embed our technicians at those construction sites to really understand, what's being installed, what issues they're running into, and what their struggles are. And that's really been a valuable training opportunity for the field technicians that eventually operate these sites. But as far as the long-term, operations and maintenance, to answer the question, I think the split really comes down to choices of, the design and the equipment selected, right? We see a very different maintenance load for our site that has incredible reliability versus a site that doesn't have very high reliability. The other thing is vegetation, right? On the vegetation side, how much does that impact the technician's work? We see a lot of sites that are in floodplains or flood zones that impact, how much or how safe the technicians can do their work. So, I would say that front end is a huge impact to, that back end or that workload. And so, that feedback loop from, operations to say, hey, this is something impacting our operations, it's impacting efficiency, it's impacting cost. If that actually gets back into the design phase and is taking into account during that front end time, that extra workload during construction, that extra money spent, will actually go a long way. So, it's really tough to answer that question because every site is so different, especially with the different builds, the different quality, and the different equipment. But it really has to be at some point that full circle where, the O&M is really driven by what the construction teams did and what that initial labor did. As far as the toughest training, troubleshooting, field repairs and emerging technologies or new inverters, identifying the component replacements. Most of these technicians, they want to be able to repair it, get things back online. And so, really getting them comfortable in the field repairs is the biggest value, in my opinion.
I'll complement Josh's remarks in terms of the operations feedback into the development pipeline. We've been developing for about 15 years or so, and over the course of the last 10 to 12 is we really started getting our operations engineers and teams more involved earlier on, before construction and during construction, so that ultimately the operations team is what is going to inherit what development puts into the ground. So you want to make sure that you're having some consistency, very much like Josh said. It's extremely important to have that consistency. We even had some of our operations engineers move over to the development engineering side so that they know if they're going to inherit this piece of equipment, it's something that we can operate.
Great. So there are quite a few questions coming up about safety, how to ensure safety for workforce, whether or not there are various kind of work permits, how basically how do they compromise safety, and how does that work for different parts of the O&M and technician work process?
I'll go ahead and start with that. I think that Invenergy Services has had a safety program since the beginning. Safety is one of our core values. We've tried to bring safety all the way down to the bottom up and top down approaches, so that you're having consistent feedback across both the boots on the ground as well as the engineers that are designing and optimizing the performance, so that the technicians understand what they're actually doing in the equipment. Understanding the equipment in the substation is a huge one. That's why we created a substation trainer position. Each of the regions in the U.S. have their own regional safety manager, and each of the sites has their own site safety rep. So regionally, they have a committee that talks about safety, talks about the different issues. We've separated it a little bit on the renewables to wind, solar, and gas. We have a gas fleet as well. But then also all of that rolls up into the same hierarchy so that we can also share across technologies if there's anything that might be consistent across technologies in terms of PPE or process.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brad. And you know, the same goes for Cypress Creek as far as safety. You know, our number one priority is safety, and even you know within the control center, you know, our top three priorities in order are safety, maintaining operational compliance, and then the performance of the facilities. Because you know, typically if we're following those first two, then the performance is going to be right behind it. And you know, one thing that I wanted to touch on with that was trying to we were talking about like standardization of things and having procedures and training, and one big thing for us is trying to build in as much consistency with platforms that we're using and the documentation that we have, so that we can reduce the chances for any operator error, which is again, it's good, that's really big on safety, and just keeping things as simple as we can, given the nature of the work.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to both those is, just like Brad and Julien mentioned, I mean, safety is our utmost priority at Duke Energy. So, one thing we instill in the technicians from day one is, their safety is in their control. Obviously the corporation plays a part of it, but they all have stop work authority at any time, anybody in the organization. And so anything that's unsafe, they have to feel comfortable to stop work, whether they're, new to the company or been here 10 years. The other thing with that is, with renewable energy, especially solar, there's a high number of remote workers. And so we're constantly focusing on remote lone worker activities, how we can improve their safety, whether that be through safety devices, tracking, PPE, and it's really one of those things where somebody could trip, heat stress, heat exhaustion, snakes, bees, wasps. Essentially, all of those are very different for the renewable industry, and so it's one of those things that one of the things that really keeps me up at night is just focusing on those remote workers, those lone workers that are out there by themselves in the field, especially if they're working on electrical equipment, whether that be control systems or much higher voltages. All of this is, inherently dangerous to the technicians. So they have to have that respect for the equipment and personal accountability for their safety with a stop work. And even if that impacts performance, we've got to understand that that's at the end of the day the most important thing.
Yeah, I will say that Josh brings up a good point in terms of electricity. Most technicians that I've talked to, we have over 300 renewables technicians in the field, have more fear of electricity than any moving part in a wind turbine or gas turbine. It's because it's invisible. You cannot see it. So having a substation trainer, having a qualified electrical worker program to be one of the first things, if not the first thing that they complete, is critical so that they get that comfortability and respect, like Josh said, for the equipment itself.
So a question from actually someone who's just graduated as an electrical engineer, who they ask how they can improve their strong points to become a suitable candidate to work within the renewable sector, and what are the strong points that an employee is looking for, an employer is looking for in an employee.
Yeah, so first off, I'll just say congratulations, good job. As far as, my advice is, as an electrical engineer, field experience is really gonna drive your success. If everything's done, in the office and on the computer and through email, there is a limited impact that an engineer is gonna have, no matter how smart they are or educated they are. So spending that time in the field, understanding, and I think it was Julien or Brad, somebody already mentioned the feedback loop from the performance engineer or the engineer and the technician in the field. And so it really has to be that mutual respect and really an openness to learn, what is the field doing? What are the challenges? And how can an engineer really help resolve some of those challenges, whether from a safety aspect or from an operational aspect or a performance side of things? And, really leveraging, your skill set from everything that you've learned, but putting it into practice by being in the field and understanding real world applications is going to take you to the next step.
Yeah, to kind of add to that, that field experience is pretty critical, because a lot of the, when you're trying to troubleshoot equipment and to really like understand what's going on and do a root cause analysis remotely, it's huge if you are even a little bit familiar with the equipment physically. That's a big reason why we started sending operators out in the field, was so that they could see the maintenance as it's happening, so that when we're talking about a particular piece of equipment in an inverter, they can visualize that in their head and really have a comprehensive understanding of how things are working behind the scenes.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more, I think that both Julien and Josh hit on it. I mean, field experience is huge. I would also recommend looking at it from all stages of a project, not just on the operating assets, but looking at it from a development and design aspect. You definitely get some experience there. We send all of our substation outages across our 50+ projects in the US. An electrical engineer is in attendance. We subcontract that to a high voltage subcontractor, we still have our electrical engineers there present. So they're still learning. Because they're also still learning in the field. So
Great. So do your organizational staffs and O&M personnel at the solar generation sites, or do you monitor remotely with technicians on call? For example, can you be at the site within 2 hours, or yeah?
So from our standpoint, it can be a mix of some of those things, or all of them. So for larger facilities, in particular our NERC registered facilities, those are going to be manned. Now, with that being said, we still are monitoring those from our control center, and the control center is that's the group that's going to be speaking with the utility transmission operator. Other than that, if it's not a manned facility, then we'll have technicians nearby. Just as we touched on earlier, hiring technicians who live locally is obviously very important. We're spread out over 19 states. We can't be flying people out to fix things. So we do typically have we can have boots on the ground within about 2 hours or less. After we've done root cause analysis remotely, and a lot of that we already have we'll have built into agreements that we'll have with third-party owners, where we have contractual obligations that we have to meet as far as response time, both remotely and in the field.
Yeah, I'll compliment. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, the same thing. It really depends on the site size. We've got sites that range from 1 megawatt to 200 megawatts. And so, the NERC facilities are manned. We're there very quickly. Some of the smaller sites, they're monitored remotely, and based on the financial impact, we might not necessarily respond to everything within 2 hours. And, just as Julien mentioned, a lot of it's contractually driven, right? If we've got a contractual requirement, obviously that's how we're staffing and that's how we're operating. But if there is no contractual obligation, what we really do is we really look at the financial impact to the overall business at a portfolio level. That site might be impacted, but if it's, not the most financial responsible decision for the organization, then we don't necessarily need to, staff or have somebody there within 2 hours for every, fault or piece of downtime. So, really it's a project by project evaluation.
Yeah, I think that those were spot on. I think that the only thing I would add is, yeah, you look at the economics for staffing the project. Now, there were a couple of projects we had that were smaller in nature. They didn't make sense to it didn't economically make sense to staff. So we would have a third-party subcontractor that we would contract for emergency response that was in the nearby area. This particular project, the transmission operator had very sensitive trip settings for that project. They had overhead collection line or overhead transmission lines. It would trip off a bunch of times. We actually considered building in a remote closure for those breakers. We never ended up doing it for safety concerns, but you can go that route depending on at least the way that you think about safety and how people in the substation or not in the substation, if you have visibility of the substation, things of that nature that you would consider before closing in a breaker, but just another option.
Great, and I think this will have to be the last question, but how do you regard and train people who came as technicians and engineers from other energy type companies? So people who have transitioned from like the petrochemical industry, the oil and gas industry, who are trained technicians, but working in obviously now a new field in renewables.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for, anytime you bring on new employees to really understand what skill sets they're bringing to the table, not just on their resume. And so we do have a certain baseline, quizzes and tests that we put new technicians through, so we understand, what is their understanding of these systems. And, the biggest difference is, people come with electrical backgrounds, but, some of the ones that we mentioned earlier on the call, they typically have a strong understanding of AC electrical. But the good majority of the troubleshooting and, field work is done on the DC side of things. And, without the full understanding of DC, there are some assumptions made that are both unsafe and can be, detrimental to how efficient a technician is in the field. So, I think it's really understanding their skill sets, understanding what they're bringing to the table, and not making assumptions on what they know and don't know, and making sure that you're taking time to certify people, even with 10 years of experience. I've worked in oil and gas for 10 years and I know this. Well, we're still putting you through a certification process to make sure that you're safe, not because we're trying to, slow your progression, but it's really to make sure that, we're doing everything we can as an organization to set them up for success.
Yeah, we employ a very similar process. I think that it's on a case-by-case basis. Now, we do still try to stick to our standardized qualification process. So when we may bring a technician from another generation type or another company into Invenergy services, we may place them in a higher level based on what they have shown or proven as their capabilities, but they'll still go through the entire process just without a time restriction associated with different qualification steps. So they have the opportunity to prove that out with still being kind of grandfathered into a higher position. And if they can't prove it out, they end up getting stepped down into a lower position until they can prove that they can qualify everything that they need to.
Yeah, Brad, that's exactly how we approach it from the control center side as well. We've hired people from traditional generation, but we, again, what we're doing is it's it's very similar, but also very different, compared to a traditional generation. We're not having to worry about like boiler pressures or anything, but we're also, we are operating, within a SCADA, for instance. So there's crossover, but then there's a fair amount of things that are certainly unique, and challenging, that I've seen, folks with a lot of experience come in, and you can still struggle just as much as anyone who doesn't have any experience.
Great. And then just to finish off, for all those that have asked, how can they apply to work and to get trained by your companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's the Duke Energy website. There's a career page that has all positions, not just renewables, across the entire organization. So that's the first and foremost place to start. Myself, I am on LinkedIn, as well as many of my counterparts. That's been an effective mode of operation for me in landing positions, as well as finding talent as well. So I would highly encourage the responsible use of social media, as well as applying directly.
Yeah, Invenergy Services is a mirror image of Josh's for Duke. Invenergy.com, there's a career opportunities page. It lists all the opportunities, both in the corporate offices, the regional offices, as well as in the field and all of our projects where positions are open. It also lists positions for projects that will come into operation probably within the next year. So I encourage you to apply, or reach out to me, like Josh said, on LinkedIn, and I can point you in the right direction. Thanks for listening today.
And Cypress Creek Renewables, you can go to our website, ccrenew.com/careers. We also post our jobs on LinkedIn, Indeed, all the usual places. And we're O&M is growing. It's been a growing field for a while, and it's going to continue to grow as more megawatts go into the ground.
Perfect. And so thank you to everyone who has joined in and participated in this Reuters Events webinar. Apologies to all of the questions that haven't been answered. There are literally hundreds coming in, but the panelists will be involved at the conference in November. So feel free to try and ask them questions at that point in time. I'm sure that they will all happily like to hear from you. To everyone who has registered, you will also be automatically signed up for the PV Operations and Financial Strategies USA 2020 virtual conference, which is again November 12th and 13th. If you'd like more information about the conference, the full program, to see our full speaker list, please go to the website by searching for Reuters Events, PV Operations and Financial Strategies 2020. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.